I'm Erica Lynn, and we all know the ocean is the most demanding environment on Earth, consistently testing the reliability and durability of our equipment. When you spend as much time fishing as I do, you know that reliable gear is essential for staying on the water. This is why I went with the Abyss battery to power my trolling motor, electronics, and outboard. The guys at Abyss Battery are rattling the saltwater industry by manufacturing performance marine batteries specifically designed for sonar, outboards, trolling motors, and electronic fishing reels. They're also Bluetooth compatible, so I found checking battery statuses right on your phone while you're out on the water is a huge game changer. To learn more about why Abyss batteries are used by the pros and factory installed by premier boat builders, visit abyssbattery.com.
Fishing like a local isn't just about catching fish. It's about connecting with the environment and the people who call it home. It's about hearing the stories and traditions that have been passed down for generations and sharing unforgettable moments with the people you meet along the way. Fishing like a local is having an experience that stays with you forever. And with Fishing Booker, you can experience it too, no matter where you are. Discover your next adventure on Fishing Booker.
Hello and welcome to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Oswald, and I hope you join me on my quest for knowledge to become a better public land hunter, angler, and forager. Stick with this and who knows, maybe we will learn something together. Hey folks, welcome back to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I am here and I am sitting talking to Clay Bowers, our co-host and host, whatever you want to call it. I don't even know how we word this. And George Barnett. George, could you please introduce yourself for everybody listening?
Yeah, my name is George Barnett. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm a foraging and outdoor instructor.
You're way more than that.
Yeah. What else are you?
I'm a dad and a student of the woods. I don't like to really make a crazy list of accolades. I like to kind of like to distill it down to the most important things. So,
I think is one of the coolest things about you is that you used to be a skateboarder. And I used to be a rollerblader, and we've both been to the Louisville skate park. I'm imagining far more than I have, but I've been down there a couple times. Yeah.
Did you guys clash?
That was one of the coolest
rumble?
things that. Yeah, that was one of the coolest things that when I first kind of got to know you and realized about you, I was like, that's pretty cool. And yeah, I grew up going down there, so it opened up when I say in 2001, when it was like just beginning, and. In some ways, you could kind of say it's raised a whole era of kids. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we don't go there very often anymore. It's gotten pretty rough down there, downtown Louisville. So,
oh wow,
Clay would have been almost, or maybe, a senior in high school at that point when it opened. Think about that.
Oh yeah. When I was there was we pulled up late in the night and this was like in the middle of the summer, and there's a whole group of us fruit booters, and we get out and there's like people on bikes doing like crazy backflips and all kinds of stuff, and I was like, whoa, like
Yeah, the skateboarding, like the whole extreme sports world, there's like hierarchies to what each individual thinks that their discipline, falls in. And of course, at that time, if I would have saw you as a high schooler, I would have definitely been going into middle school, maybe even elementary school at the time. But I would have still somehow convinced myself that I was cooler than you because I was a skateboarder.
Well, naturally, you probably were. And Clay's favorite movie at the time was probably Brink from Disney. And you know what I'm talking about,
Brink.
too.
I love Brink, yeah. The thing that I've learned, though, is that really, no matter what you're doing down there, they're all just toys. And they're all just, their own fun thing. Because like when my oldest son, Levi, I got him into skating, kind of. I didn't, it was like no pressure. It was like, here's a board. And then he got a scooter, and that's all he ever takes to any place now. And now I'm like on his scooter, taking it from him and doing other things. And so I've learned that really it's just having fun what you're actually doing. It doesn't matter what it is. So
I almost
Yeah.
ate pavement the other day on my son's scooter. So
yeah,
my daughters both had one, and we took them to a parking lot that was empty, and we were riding them, racing around, and there was a playground there and stuff. And I took my son's scooter, so the handlebars were naturally super short because he's the youngest. And the front wheel, I'm racing my kids, and I'm like passing them up, and all of a sudden I feel the front wheel start turning, and it's like almost about to go sideways, and I just had to bail and jumped, and I'm running just so I won't eat pavement, and the scooter's way behind me. Oh, it's terrible. I'm like, I'm too old for this.
yeah, it's crazy. Doing something like skateboarding, and I would imagine rollerblading as well, but like some of the discipline kind of can transfer over into different things. Cause like even with like a scooter, like I don't ever really spend any serious amount of time on it, but like when I'm on it, there's still a lot of like familiar like mobility that I have on a skateboard. And so it translates over kind of in a way, kind of like how, I would imagine if Clay, I don't know when the last time that you've rollerbladed was, but I would imagine that if you got onto a scooter, you could probably still have like the instinctual moment, like movement of like a back 360.
Yeah. What's funny, George, is so a lot of people don't know this, but my dad used to own a skate park. So so I actually used to be able to go around a whole skate park and drop in on the half pipe and everything on a scooter, just because I would like I would like joke around on a scooter. And I'm talking, this is like back when scooters were like really lame, and everybody thought that people who did scooters were the worst. I won't say the word everybody used, but
you can't use that word now. It's been
no.
It's been canceled.
Yeah, canceled.
Yeah. But yeah, so I used to skate the scooter, I should say, the half pipe with a scooter.
I love that. That's awesome.
So did your scooter have like a handbrake on it, and it was like actual like pneumatic tires, or was it like the rollerblade wheel scooters?
Rollerblade wheel scooter.
Really? I didn't even think they had those back then, Clay.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, back in the day.
In the day.
But anyway, so do you think that has anything to do, because like both me and you, George, have that background in the extreme sports, and then I don't know about you, but like I feel like I got injured so much and my body's all achy now because like I did that for so long that to me, foraging and being out in the woods and walking peacefully and not doing anything aggressive actually seems like such a nice contrast that has happened. I don't know if you feel that way.
No, yeah, I've definitely both subconsciously and consciously like kind of made those parallels to be like, what are some things? And like with skating, I was never like a big stair or like rail skater. I was always more into like the technical, like ledge skating and stuff like that. And I've definitely had those thoughts before. But I always find and come down to the interesting parallel that I think is the funniest is that both of them are like largely like looked down upon today and illegal in a lot of places. So that's been the biggest similarity between the two things. But also to your point, being of an older age and being able to do a passive thing that consumes your mind in the very similar way for me anyway that skateboarding once did. I mean, it was my whole world at that particular time in my youth, and now there's just so much more complexities with parenthood and making a living, but foraging is kind of the seals around all of those otherwise very important parts of your life.
Yeah. So you before we actually started recording, you were telling us a story about this persimmon tree down the road, and I want to hear. I said stop. We got to hear about this tree while we're recording. So currently, right now, what's the temp outside where you're at?
Well, there is a little bit of a warm spell that's showed up in the past 48 hours, but for about going on 3 weeks now, it's been in the high 20s, low 30s half the day, and maybe getting up into the high 30s into the low 40s at the hottest point in the day. And,
Mhm.
tomorrow's December 1st. And so, yeah, this tree it's on my commute where I go to pick up and drop off my son to school.
Mhm.
And I've just been watching it since October when the fruits were just starting to really ripen. And now every leaf of it from the tree is gone, and it's still, carrying anywhere from I would say realistically 80 to 100 plus pounds of fruit. I mean, every single limb is still weighing down with clusters of 3 to 4 persimmons on each branch. So,
Wow. So, okay, I'm a novice here at Persimmons because I don't have them in my area. Are those are all still viable fruits that are going to taste good and everything? I mean, even with the fluctuations in the weather, is that something that you're still going to pick and enjoy?
yeah, so the viability, I mean, in the sense of like taste, that kind of comes to the territory that not all persimmons are created equal. you know
Mhm.
so even in the even when they first start to ripen, you're going to have some that are just not that good because they tend to be higher in tannins, the flesh, and maybe it's that the actual size of the fruit is smaller, and so you get more flesh when you go to consume the pulp, which
Mm,
might have those tannins on there to make it more astringent and bitter. Um, so my approach to gathering persimmons is kind of being selective on trying to find larger fruit
mm,
um, in general, but when that might not be the case or possible, to just experiment and try a fruit or two from each tree, and then just stick with the trees that do provide the fruit that you can really just pop in your mouth. Because I don't really like the process of having to remove the really thin skin around it. I like being able just to put the whole fruit in my mouth and then spit the seeds out.
mm.
So for those particular persimmons on that tree, uh, it's very nice because it's accessible by a public sidewalk, and you can actually pull your car off of the road and go walk up to it, but it's on like a pretty otherwise busy, you know, street. And we gathered some last week and right before Thanksgiving, and they were all still, perfect as far as their flavor profile goes. The only thing about them is at this point they're a little bit more shriveled because they have been on the tree for some time, and it's been relatively dry here for a month now. But
Hmm.
they're still totally great. And in that particular tree, you can just pop that entire thing in your mouth, spit the seeds out, and because they're still on the tree, you just have to remove the calyx on the top, which just comes right off with a twist. So they're great.
So are you going to wait for them to fall or pick them then?
Yeah, and some persimmons they will hold on to them. Uh, I'm not going to say indefinitely, but they can really hold on. Some persimmons you'll come across, and this tree I believe would fit that bill, where they'll hold on to the fruit uh, until probably uh, the end of the year, if not into January, where maybe the ice weighs the branches down or particular winds. They'll eventually fall, of course, but persimmons, they start to drop on the ground here, um, maybe the last week of September,
Mhm.
maybe even mid-September some years, depending on how much moisture we have. But they start to drop here, in right around, a week or so after fall has begun. And so uh, for them to be on trees this late, it's not uncommon, but you don't see them, be full still. And sometimes that can actually be a negative indicator. It can mean that maybe that the fruit didn't properly ripen, maybe because of some of the caterpillars that feed on persimmon leaves. It can basically just stop the production of the fruit to develop fully and ripen because the leaves weren't, they were being preyed upon, and then the actual fruit just didn't actually have the energy to create and actually fully develop those fruits. And so I've noticed that as well. And there's one also not very far from me that does that regularly, where it'll hold on to some fruit, but they were always bad to begin with. They just never really had good fruit, and they always have really bad tent caterpillars. So
Wow. Um, just out of curiosity, what is the latest that you've ever seen a persimmon on a tree?
Well, I'll probably have a better answer in about a month whenever this tree probably still has fruit on it. But I would say, maybe around Christmas, so right at the end of the year. But when I would come across that, it would maybe be, one or two fruit that were still hanging up somehow onto a tree and just never fell. Having said that, I typically go about my foraging for persimmons throughout, all of October. So early October is when I'll start to actually scout the trees that I really, really like, that I'm kind of grown familiar with. And then I just gather, basically I like cycle throughout the 6 or 7 different trees that I frequent, persimmon trees. And, some years I'll gather a lot more than other years. This year was a really good year. Just as far as my availability to get to those trees, a lot of them are within, all of them, in fact, are within a 20-minute drive from my home. And so I probably got somewhere around like 10 or 15 gallons of persimmon fruit this year, but last year I think I might have only gotten like 4 gallons.
Holy cow.
So,
Wow.
Yeah. So it just, but have it, also again, that just comes down to availability, how many 5-gallon buckets on hand do you have, kind of thing. Cause you could really clean up here. I mean, if you wanted to gather hundreds of gallons, you could. I'm also at the mercy of having a really small home and, 2 kids and a wife. So space, sometimes they want some fridge space themselves for other foods. So I have
greedy.
I have to be fair. So
you can dry the persimmons and use them like later, right? I mean, will they still retain?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do that. So we dehydrate them, and they can kind of give you, a similar experience to like a date when they're dried like that. And I do love them that way. But my favorite way to preserve them is just to pulp them. So we just put them, into a colander and push them through, and then we take all that pulp and we just freeze it in, gallon Ziploc bags. And then we've even experimented like last year with making fruit leather. It's really kind of a sticky mess because persimmon, when you handle it and the fruit actually, is out in the air for a while, as far as like being like pulped and everything, it becomes really sticky, almost kind of like if you were handling like wet flour. And if you were just to like leave it on your hands, it gets really, really sticky. It's really difficult to clean off utensils and stuff once you're done pulping them because of how sticky it becomes whenever it dries. So we did the fruit leather. I think I'll probably do it again a different way, but we used a lot of parchment paper and it was really, really good, but a mess. Yeah.
That reminded me though, a few minutes ago, what you were talking about with the different persimmons having different flavors. I was up in Ashland, Wisconsin this summer, right before and after ricing season. I always pick wild plums, and wild plums vary so much like that. I've noticed you can have some that are teeny and kind of bitter, and then you find other ones that are like really big and sweet. And this year, actually, a tip from Sam Thayer that I took was, he said, find those ones that taste really good and then take root suckers off of those ones. And so I brought home a whole bunch of root suckers off of these really good tasting plums. So they're in my backyard right now, and I'm fingers crossed Cottontail's not going to eat them during the winter.
Yeah, no, I hope that is the case. And that's kind of how we operate as well. Like, so some of the trees that I get exceptional persimmons from, you can tell that the trees are not just like seedlings that happened naturally, but that they were planted more intentionally, some type of a cultivar that was planted because of its fruit production. And because of that, when possible, especially of course, gathering those fruits, we stratify all the seeds and we try to give them out. We plant them on friends and family's property. Persimmons have a fairly high germination rate as far as stratifying them in the fridge and just, putting them out. they have a fairly high germination rate. They don't germinate until here in Kentucky until about mid to late June. They'll actually start to germinate. So it's fairly late. But what's nice too is you can put the seeds out on the landscape pretty early. So I keep all the seeds in the fridge until about February, and then I'll go out and scatter them about and just put a little bit of mulch over them. And come the summer, they'll germinate. The only thing that you really have to be really careful of, and probably not even do at all, is try to transplant them shortly after they've germinated. I've tried that before just to experiment, and it doesn't really work that well for me. So
when you keep them in the fridge, do you keep them in soil or just the bare seed?
What I do is I keep them in just the bare seed. They have a seed sac around them that I just pierce through with my teeth gently when I'm eating the fruit, and it completely adheres around the whole seed, and so you can just peel it right out. Pawpaws are the same way.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was going to say. Is that's what
yeah.
I do with the pawpaws is I bite that seed sac off, but I just put them in soil. I was kind of afraid, like if I left them by themselves in the fridge, it might, I don't know, damage them if it got too cold in the door of the fridge or something.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a fridge that maybe was that tended to be on the colder side, you might want to be a little bit more cautious. But out where all of us live, really, it gets below freezing at times, and so out in when they're doing their natural biological process of germinating from seed, they are going to go through extremely cold temperatures as well, just maybe not for an extended period. But I just keep them in a Ziploc bag. I just rinse them really well. You don't have to. I know people who literally just take the fruits and they'll either put them in bags just with the rotten fruit around it.
Mm-hmm. I've had a mold doing that.
Yeah, so it makes like a vinegar. It's pretty wild. And then I have, people who are really intentional about it, and they'll have, for people that I plant on their properties for them, they'll actually just want me to take the actual fruit and plant it instead of just the seed. So they'll just want the actual persimmons to be planted, because they're trying to mimic that natural system, to a T, which, it works as good as how you would do it with just planting the seed,
Mm-hmm. I've had many years to do this because I plant and stratify seeds every single year, and I try to get stuff planted out. But one year I had a whole 5-gallon bucket of, it was these hybrid butternut black walnuts, and
sounds amazing.
And I couldn't get to them all. They just laid outside all winter, and the next spring I come out there, and I swear to God, 75% of them were germinating in the bucket. They had little sprouts coming out of them.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's no soil, anything. They're just all on top of each other in a bucket. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy.
So did you plant them?
Yeah.
I went on a planting frenzy.
Yeah. As long as you keep the little radicle intact, and they're not like a darker color, because usually when the radicals turn like that darker brown, that means that they basically died.
Yeah.
But we do the same with chestnuts, but what we do is we do it with acorns as well, and hickory nuts. We do like the wet sawdust or the playground sand method, where we just kind of layer them in buckets and then bury them. I think I got that idea from Akiva Silver, but that guy grows like 20,000+ trees a year up in New York, and he does a lot of like the burying with like chicken wire and that kind of stuff, and so we've adopted a lot of those methods, and they work.
So when you're saying bury them, you're saying bury them for the winter or bury them permanently?
Yeah, so for that specific thing, it was burying them for the winter, and so taking something like a 5-gallon bucket and removing the bottom of it and layering it or lining it rather with a hardware cloth to allow really good draining, and then layering it and the inside with, let's say, a layer of sand or wet sawdust, and then seed, whether it be chestnuts, hickory nuts, acorns, and then just repeating that layering all the way to the top, and then taking the lid and then drilling a dozen or 16 holes in it for drainage. And then you bury that to the level. So the actual opening of the bucket should be on the ground level. And then putting a nice 2 to 4 foot layer of natural material on top as an insulator. And so what you're doing is you're giving yourself a lot of space for seed to be stratifying in a really passive way that doesn't require energy like from a refrigerator. It also doesn't take up all the space in your home. Because we just have a regular refrigerator where we live. And I mean, if you have 50 to 60 chestnuts you're trying to stratify, that takes up the whole bottom drawer of a regular refrigerator. So also for space, it just depends on your size of goal or project, because, if it's just, an experiment, you still want to have a chance. And so I'd still want to have at least a dozen or so seeds, because not all of them are going to germinate probably, but.
Yeah. And then what you mentioned too is worth repeating for anybody who's getting into this, is that if you do live in an area that's got a lot of seed predators like squirrels and things, you mentioned putting over chicken wire or something, right? And I'm assuming that's blocking the consumption of those, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and we do that, we use deer protection and chicken wire and hardware cloth. Yeah. For, the amount of, squirrels and chipmunks, white-tailed deer, raccoon, skunk. We just have so much wildlife that, do depend on it, but, which is a whole other, situation where it's like, for as many things as I try to intentionally stratify and then plant out, that amount times 3 is what I end up putting out on the landscape for the wildlife, because we're always cracking out black walnuts and hickory nuts and acorns. And whenever there's that refuse, I'm constantly shooting it into our backyard because, if anything, it's helping them out. And it makes great compost as well, whatever they aren't eating as far as the shells go. So.
Yeah. So you have actually like a background in forestry, right?
Yeah. I didn't go to school for it. It was fortunately a particular industry that I had gotten interested in just kind of personally. And I started doing a lot of studying into forestry, and then volunteered as a backcountry ranger with the Forest Service down in Eastern Kentucky in the Boone National Forest. And that kind of opened up the world of like the possibilities here in our state, which there's not really many avenues for careers. There are some businesses that you can have in forestry here, but they're pretty limited. So yeah, I've worked in forestry in and out since 2021.
That's super cool. So you said Eastern Kentucky, right? You did you ever come across elk?
I have seen elk, not in that particular area that I was doing my volunteer work in, but that is the same national forest. So that's more in what's called the Cave Run Lake area of Boone National Forest. That's where the elk were introduced, and they have a lottery for elk hunting. And
I put it in every year.
Awesome. Yeah, I figured that you might have, since I learned that you live closer than I thought. But yeah, I mean, that's an amazing place to go up and camp. They have an amazing campground system up there and really good hiking. And we're really into fishing and pack rafting, and that's just a really cool place to go up there and do it. And there's a lot up there. I mean, the population up there is pretty high, but it's not anything like white-tailed deer or anything. But you can come across them pretty regularly when you're up there hiking and backpacking.
Yeah. Plus, it's one of the cheapest tags of any elk tag that you apply for. It's I think it's like $5 or $10 for a non-resident to apply, and then if you draw, I still think it's only $500, which is.
On average, it takes about 30 days for a person to break their New Year's resolution. So if saving money was on your 2024 list, your odds aren't really looking that great. Luckily, I have a 100% guaranteed way to save you money this year. Just switch to Mint Mobile right now. Mint Mobile has wireless plans starting at just $15 a month. That's unlimited talk, text, and data for $15 a month. If you save as much as I think you're going to, you are going to be able to afford a brand new rod and reel. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. To get your new wireless plan for $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That's mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
You want to succeed, you want to fish, you want to be one of the greatest.
Tune in to West Marine's Life on the Water, presented by Costa Custom Boats, every Saturday night from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV.
About a third of the price of some of the elk tags these days that you have to apply for.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I take that back. With the license, it's like $400 or $500, I think, which is pretty cheap compared to a place like Colorado, where a non-resident, it's like a $200 fee for a license and then $800 or $900 tag. Pretty crazy.
Now with Colorado, is it also a lottery system, or is that just more of an actual you're paying your way?
Colorado's both. So they have over the counter, and then they also have a lottery system. And then more and more units are becoming a lottery due to elk population decline and more hunters. So, yeah. Other states like New Mexico are completely random, and you could apply for 10 years and not draw a tag, and still have to buy the license to do it. In Arizona, you have to buy a license in order to apply, and then you have to build points in Arizona. And some of the units you might need a lifetime's worth of points, so like 50, well, maybe not 50, but coming up pretty close to 50 points in order to even draw.
Wow,
it's pretty crazy.
Unfortunately, my my elk eating is an unknown, just because I have alpha gal, and so
man,
that's one of the things that as much as I would love to go on an elk hunt, and I probably actually, having said that, I probably would still try an elk steak, even if just for the sake of the experience. But I do in fact have alpha gal, and I believe I probably got that in 2018 when I was down there working with the Forest Service. And it was just because of the amount of ticks that were actually attached to me. Is why my mind kind of goes into thinking that might have been the case, just because of the nature of what I do. I get anywhere from 50 to 100 tick bites every summer. And I get probably triple that in sugar bites. But that year particularly, I would just be out in the field for so many days at a time, building trails and maintaining trails, that when I would get back home and finally shower, I know, just because of the size of some of the ticks that I had to remove, that they were on me for a good 48 hours.
So they were actually Lone Star ticks then?
Black-legged, a lot of black-legged ticks, and then some Lone Stars, yeah.
Wow. So let's explain for everybody that doesn't know what alpha gal is, which hopefully that can be a lesson to them. But I mean, Lone Star ticks carry a disease, or is it a bacteria that infects the human, or is it an actual disease?
Yeah, so I want to say it's considered as a disease.
Yeah,
I want to say, and basically it's how I understand it is, it's the fat content, or the fat that's in the blood of red-blooded animals, is what you get an allergy to, and that's because the tick had that, and just like with Lyme, spread to you via feeding on you and backwashing that disease into you.
And now you cannot eat red meat, or at least eat it without getting sick.
Yeah, and so that's when I truly feel like I probably got it. Again, I could have gotten it a couple of years after. The reason why it's also kind of gray is because I was vegetarian for about 6 years. Yeah. So I was vegetarian, and that was just more of like a thing where um, I still run, not as much as I'd like to say I do still, but I was running a lot at the time. And whenever I would eat any kind of meat of any kind, it threw my running off pretty substantial. And so I just kind of cut meat out of my diet just to see how it would do, what kind of benefits it would give my body. And I got really thin, like not like sickly thin, but I got down to like 138 pounds. And, but I was eating, otherwise really healthy diet. And I was already foraging and getting a lot of other nutrients that you wouldn't get from eating let's say a 21st century vegan or vegetarian diet, which can really be unhealthy if you're eating a lot of processed foods. But so I was doing that and outside all the time, working outside, running. And it was in 2020, I was working as a horticulturalist at a local park here called the Parklands. And on my going away, like my last day type of gathering, we had a dinner, and my boss, who's a great guy, he had brought deer jerky in for all of us to try. And so I was kind of like, it just looked and smelled so good, and it was so appealing. And then where we went to go eat, he had ordered some burgoo, and burgoo is kind of like a stew with like several meats in it.
Yep.
And I was like, you know what? I'm going to have the burgoo, and I'm going to eat and try some of this deer jerky. And so I ate the burgoo. I had the deer jerky, just a single piece. And then about 4 hours later, so right at the end of my shift, my palms started itching and like burning. Palms on my hand and feet. And, and at the time of year, it was actually right around this time of year, right at the end of November, 2020. I get home, I take a shower, and my body is covered in like welts, like red welts, like rashy type welts all over my torso and my back and my neck. And I'm kind of feeling like how you would feel after you've woken up and are hungover, and it's about, midday the following day into a hangover. That's kind of how I felt. And at this point, it was maybe 6 hours or so. And I was like, what is going on? I couldn't get it. I got out of the shower and basically went up to our bedroom. And that's just not me. I'm usually the first one up and the last one in bed. And I was like, this is weird. Something's going on. And then my fiance checked on me, and sure enough, I had all these different welts on me, and I felt like I was just, burning at the palms. And I told her what I ate, and it took her a while to believe it. And then she was kind of like, maybe it's something, from you eating meat. What meat did you eat? And I couldn't really give her an answer.
Because
it's kind of like, the thing. Yeah. Because, and like, it's funny because like, that's one of the things I talk about in foraging classes, like when it comes to like really any one particular wild food that's new to you. But like, I discuss it a lot about mushrooms, where it's like, if you go and gather one or two or three more species, anything more than one species of mushroom at a time, and take it home to prepare it, to never prepare them both at the same time together if it's your first time eating them, because you might have an adverse reaction to one, but might not know which one it is. So I kind of was, having to experience that myself. But, in my defense, it was with something that I thought was safe to eat, being meat products. But yeah, and so it took about a half day, so about 12 or so hours to get over that, until I felt myself again and the hives went down. And I was kind of a little nervous. It was almost kind of like, seeing a weakness or an illness that you had that you weren't really sure what it was. And it was about a 3 months or so period between wanting to try it again, because once it was kind of, the census was reached at first with like me and Sam, my fiance, being like, do I have alpha-gal? And she was like, do you want to go and get a steak and try to eat it? I was like, I don't know if I want to go through that already again. Like that was really uncomfortable. But about 3 months later, I tried it again, and it was ground bison. We were making tacos. And I was making them for the family, and I've been preparing meat every all the time for my family. I make them steak, and we do, we don't really consume a lot of pork, but we do a lot of chicken, and we fish a lot, but we do a lot of steak and bison. And I was making bison tacos, and I had a single tablespoon of ground bison meat. And 4.5 hours later, same exact thing. Hives, felt really out of it. And I was basically down for another half day. And that's where I was kind of like, okay, I'm gonna assume that I have this. And then, a couple months later, I went and did the testing for it, which is kind of weird because it's not like something that you just walk into a hospital.
Be like, hey, I have alpha-gal, or I think I do, right?
Yeah, it was really more so like, doing like 4 different things, and then them finally getting back to me saying, yeah, you're matching up with this other case that we have of it, so it's kind of like this thing. And also too, from the blood work and the allergy work that they do that goes into it or whatever, they can't ever really tell you anything about, it's going to go away, or you might have it, this long. Obviously there's no way for them to be able to tell you that, but I've done my own research and have found that, some people, have the symptoms from eating meat only for 8 or so months, and then they're fine. Mm-hmm. I've seen other instances where it's been 5 years, someone's had it for 20 years. And so it's kind of a really gray area. And so it's unfortunate, especially because while I was already really well into foraging and everything at that time, and I discovered that I had it, it was also at a time where I was starting to kind of entertain the idea of hunting and to be able to add that into the foraging aspect. Because I've always fished, and I love fishing so much. Now I have to love it because that's the only thing I can really go out and kill and eat. But it's a shame, and I hope that one day I can, have some of my brother's deer or what have you, and be able to enjoy it. Maybe if you ever get your lottery for an elk, maybe
come with me
by my house. And, I will. But yeah, I would love to be able to do that. And so now it's kind of like focusing on the things that I can. So, wild turkey, we have an abundance of that here. The other game.
Do you get 3 tags in Kentucky
for turkey?
Yeah.
Is it? I want to say there's 2 seasons, and so is it 3 a year or 3 per season?
I think it's 3 a year.
We have spring.
3 a year. It's fall separate, I think, but I think you're allowed 3. It's either 2 or 3 in the spring season, which is quite a few birds. I mean, realistically,
we're only allowed to have 1 here.
Really? Yeah. I mean, we have so many of them here. When I was working as a forester based on Fort Knox, we were doing a very massive tree planting project for an area that had been logged 3 years prior. They do a lot of, the natural resources department out there. They get really all their revenue from logging, jobs. And so they'll do a lot of different mixed variety hardwoods, but then they'll also just do a bunch of, telephone pole plantings, and we had went in, and it was like a dream job for someone like me, where we were planting around 27,000 bare root whips of 4 different species of oak and 3 species of hickory. So I was just in heaven, like planting this future food forest. But it was in the spring, of course. And every morning that we got out to that area, it was a 32-acre plot. There was anywhere from 20 to 50 wild turkeys out in this food plot area every morning. And it was just incredible. I mean, they're so abundant here. And they're also a really cool animal just to observe. That's also something I've gotten really into the past decade, is just observing animals.
Well, it's like the reintroduction of the turkey is just fascinating, that it was almost completely decimated throughout the entire Midwest and then brought back enough to where it's actually a viable resource to hunt. I mean, that's just amazing. Like I've said it many times on the podcast, but multiple times, I mean, throughout, I can't remember anything else like that to where there was a reintroduction of it. My dad took me. I remember I was like maybe 9 years old, maybe 10. And he's like, let's go to a meeting. I think it'll be really cool. You might find it interesting. And it was the proposal for reintroducing the wild turkey in back into Illinois. And so they were talking about it. The biologists talked about it. And then there was board members and stuff that, talked about the different proposals and plans and how to do it. And then sure enough, it was like 10 years later after the initial reintroduction that I drew my first turkey tag.
That's awesome.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah. I hope that there's more, feats like that in our lifetime, with other species. That would be an amazing thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would love to see elk farther and out. It's like Michigan's elk herd. You guys, in Kentucky, you guys got like 15,000 elk. Well, Michigan keeps their population like penned in, basically.
200.
No, not 200.
I know, but you know what I'm saying.
There's 200 moose. Yeah, there's like 2,000 elk here, but they're not allowed to range out. So it's like it's this whole ridiculous thing. They basically prioritize giving hunters like access to hunting on the outskirts to stop them from migrating out of this area that they're in.
So that was going to be my question. So as far as it, is that kind of their way to mitigate them from going outside of that range?
Yeah, it's like basically like kill all the ones that try to leave.
Now, is that a benefit though to those people that are able to hunt? Because is it something where they're having to pay all the same fees and everything to hunt them, or is it more of like, here's a deal where maybe it's discounted or waived entirely as far as the actual? I don't think
it's discounted. It's still relatively hard to even draw one of those tags, but
oh wow, okay.
It's
just
to
appease, of hunters.
It's to appease the people that wanted the reintroduction, right? So they appease them, but at the same time, it's to appease the insurance companies of all, vehicle insurance companies and everything else because of the destruction and damage that would happen to all the vehicles and elk collisions if they migrated out towards all the highway systems.
Well, and
that's
then
so
the farmers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just the whole thing. But we always think about like the reintroduction of the turkey and how it's like a great success because it's back in every single state that it once was now. But like with the elk, that used to be a Great Plains creature.
Correct. How cool would it be to stalk an elk across the Great Plains, intermingled with the bison?
Yeah.
I think about that a lot. I over the last like 6 years or so, I've gotten, still definitely as far as the amount of material that exists out there, I'm still got a lot of work to do. But I've gotten really into the 18th century, that period and reading a lot of just journals and collections from the frontier. And so it's just such a fascinating way outside of just the foraging lens that, we kind of take on of just being out in a particular ecosystem and thinking about what it would have looked like 250, 300 years ago, what animals would have been foraging that particular patch, where you're getting your chanterelles from. And those are just those kind of things I think about like increasingly often.
I think many outdoorsmen do. I often ponder, like what if I could be able to just, take and boil this water and get salt and then shoot an elk and preserve it right there where I'm at while I'm still, collecting the rest of my salt for the year.
I got a question about that. Because Kentucky's known for all these salt licks, right? And I just got finished actually reading the biography of Daniel Boone.
Boone.
Robert Moore.
And no, I can't. I actually don't even know who wrote it. I can't tell you.
Okay.
This was a couple months ago. But the salt thing is so interesting to me. So like, can you elaborate on that? What's with the salt in Kentucky? What's with us? At least like I grew up with this notion that like Native Americans just didn't ever eat salt.
No,
that's not true.
No, their favorite ways to eat. Their favorite ways, to eat deer were with the salt that they would make or maple sugar. You know? So, but yeah, not knowing exactly what autobiography you read on Boone. I've read not all of them, but a lot. And one of the really, you know, kind of go-to autobiographies is Robert Moore's, and it's just called Boone. But yeah, he, you know, as far as the salt licks go, you know, we have a lot of springs here. We have a lot of, you know, salt licks, and that was where the bison would congregate. They would go there for this, you know, they would actually very often find, you know, bison remains, skeletal remains at the salt licks. But yeah, they would spend 1 to 2 months at a time. These, you know, groups of guys, maybe a dozen, 2 dozen guys going out there for, the production of salt. And so they would collect the water from the spring and boil it down, and, you know, make a lot of salt, many bushels of salt, and then transport that back to their forts or stations, you know, wherever they were at. But, yeah, I mean, we have so many different areas throughout Kentucky, are named, you know, Pope Lick, you know, or whatever type of lick or salt lick. And so they're all over. You know, unfortunately, as far as the actual preservation of all of them, or most of them really, you know, it's not necessarily the case. But it's a really neat, I feel very fortunate just because of the subject matter that I'm interested in at this point in my life. I feel very fortunate to be in a place where, while it's not in the exact hands it was left in, maybe from what you're reading, you can kind of still at least go to those places and imagine it, maybe with what's left. And in some instances, way more than others, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's just a really, really neat area. There was a lot of, you know, important things that took place in this part of the country, you know, in that period in the 18th century. A lot of terrible things, and a lot of, you know, heroic people, and a lot of bad people were in this area. But, you know, I've kind of went on these different collections of information through those, you know, books. And so when it comes to the utilization of particular, you know, plants or tree crops, utilizations of plant material, I like to kind of find and extract those from some of those frontier journals, because you're getting, you know, maybe a little bit of a different taste of what was going on at that time by another mindset or by another, you know, perspective. And then also seeing the correlations and how things were transmitted information wise. You know, like a big thing that I took away from a lot of the journals was that when the frontier was taking place and stuff like copper and brass kettles were brought into this area, the trading that took place between that type of material, which allowed Native Americans to be able to boil down sap into making syrup and sugar quicker and more efficiently, you know, then that kind of trade was through also the education to the settlers and to those people on how to actually do that in the first place. And not just from the maples, of course, but from several tree species. And yeah, it's just such a fascinating thing. And I mean, I know that you're really into maple syrup production, right, Clay? Or
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's certain, you know, things that really fascinate me more than others when it comes to particular plants. You know, like some of them really have a hold on me. Like I know, like when I associate, and it's funny because you can associate sometimes your peers with certain mushrooms or plants. And so like when I think of you, I think of like chaga. Yeah. You know, it's like,
that's funny.
It's cool to be able to do that. And, but yeah, so that type of literature, you know, it of course is going to have its qualms, and it's going to have things that in today's world would make people crawl out of their skin to read. But for as many of those things as there are, I get a lot out of reading some of the things that took place, and some of, you know, we live such a privileged life today. Yeah. And if you're ever caught forgetting that, just pick up a book from the 1800 period, even the 1900 or the 19th century and 18th century. I mean, just pick up a book and read about that. There's a fascinating book that took place up in Michigan from the 18th century called The Bark Covered House. Have you ever heard of that, Clay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's a really neat one as well. I tend to stick more in my area as far as the books go, but that one came upon me from a resource and I read it, and it was awesome.
Seems like a lot of the historical stuff. So I too have that fascination, with reading about that. And just like you, I also gravitate towards my area. So I'll read a lot about Mackinac Island, the Straits of Mackinac, all that like canoe voyaging like that the natives did. And honestly, it does seem like there was like a lot of people coming from Michigan down to Kentucky and vice versa. Just what I kind of think about a lot with that though, and what's mind blowing to me is like that knowledge of the river systems that they had, just like holding in their head. It was like, I'm gonna go, like you can go across Michigan, like there's two rivers that go with a 7-mile portage in the middle. But people used to take those two rivers, all the time to just skip instead of going around the whole top of Michigan, they would just go like up the Ausable and then down the Manistee, and then all manner of different rivers would take you to different places, and everybody had that like just knowledge in their head, and I just think that's crazy.
I completely agree. I mean, I'm reading a book called, I think it's just called The Frontiersman, and it's about a couple different things. But it covers Simon Kenton in depth, and he's considered kind of an unsung underground hero to a lot of people who only think about Daniel Boone. Mm-hmm. But there is, enough information of Simon Kenton to know his story. But I was just reading a piece of that book this morning, and to what you were just talking about, he's getting in touch with a group of guys that he was going to go on an expedition with that was just going to be more so like a hunting season where they just hunted and trapped and gathered their furs like they did to be able to then go and trade and sell in the spring. And he went and did this particular, I think it was like a 1 or 2 month long expedition, like a hunting, just trapping expedition. And from doing it one time, he knew exactly how to get this group of guys right back to the same camp that he had helped, build the year before. And so, again, you mentioned how they were able to kind of maintain so much in their, cognition about place. And, how often is it that you can probably go to a place today in your car, and maybe you went there once, and then you go there a second time, maybe a month or two later, and you need to GPS it again. It's pretty common today. And I'm guilty of that too, right?
Do you guys think that has something to do with at the rate of speed that everything moves, including travel? It has like reduced our ability to perceive things in a different way like that?
I think it's that. And I also think that there's an aspect of a connectiveness that comes from something like hunting and from gathering. And so, like, for example, a place, if I wanted to take you all to a particular area where I've gotten a lot of morels that's 7 miles off trail, I could find that again because I'd do it every year, because there was that, purpose, and there was, that sycamore really stands out. And I remember just as soon as I crossed that sycamore and I went over that floodplain, there they all were last year. And so I think that there is a big part of that playing into, as well as the actual experiences that took place with those people at that time that helped them remember it and can retain more of that information. But it's still, I guess, just because we're not a product of that anymore, it still just seems like we've de-evolved in such a way from that. And you really think about it and you're like, I know, like for me personally, I would like to challenge myself to try to find a way to get back a little bit closer to that way of life than the other. And I think I do in many ways, but in some ways too, it's kind of impossible to to get that back, because everything is, since that period of time, so much ground has been developed, and you know, our system is kind of designed to where you can't get lost even if you want to. So
I'd like to get lost for a couple of years.
Back to Daniel Boone for a second. You know, you live in Kentucky. One of the things I found funny in that biography was that he left Kentucky because it was getting a little too crowded, and there was 200,000 people. And all of Kentucky. But I'm saying,
I get exactly what you mean, but you know, but also think about going there and it only being you and the odd chance, which at times was a high chance, of any one particular Native American tribe, you know, occupying that area for a hunting camp, sugaring camp, what have you. And he would be out there for so long surveying, and, you know, he would be in these incredibly, you know, treacherous, steep ravine type of areas, you know, surveying out parcels of property. And so, yeah, I mean, I can be kind of a recluse, you know, to the point where, you know, I might go a half a day, maybe a day without like talking to anybody. If I'm like out backpacking or something, and then maybe the next morning I have a 3-hour foraging class with 30 people, and I have to kind of like switch that you know thing on where I'm like, okay, you got to be yourself, but also a person who can like, who wants to talk and who wants to kind of communicate and be the way that you are about this material, and that can be challenging. So I kind of get what Boone would say. Or whenever he was kind of famously quoted of saying that, but also too, he knew that he was responsible for that, you know, because his whole deal was getting people to come out there to settle, right? And so when he finally got his wish, he kind of regretted it. And unfortunately, in some ways, he, he just made a lot of terrible decisions business-wise and trusting-wise. He was really naive in some ways, and it's unfortunate that, you know, to call someone naive because they wanted to take a man for their word would be considered naive, but it was at times and still is. But, you know, he also kind of just made Missouri his home at the last part of his life, because he ended up doing all this work to get Kentucky settled, and he did it. And then he had nothing to call his own. So.
Yeah, that's a major bummer. I could not imagine. Having that experience. And to actually speak back to what you were saying a minute ago, though, about the privilege we all have, I did want to mention that I have a yearly thing. I like to read One Horrible Arctic Exploration Gone Wrong every winter.
Love it.
What'd you read?
I mean, last winter I read a couple of them, but like,
which one?
This year I think.
What'd you do?
I read Madhouse at the End of the Earth. And that was the Antarctica.
Okay.
So there's the Belgica. They went down there, and everybody went batshit crazy. and then I reread Endurance, which I've read like 3 or 4 times because it's such an amazing book.
That was the ship, right? The Endurance that got lost.
The Endurance. Yep. And then I think I read also, I can't remember the name of it, but
was it Buddy Levy, the Something in Ice or something?
Labyrinth of Ice. I read that a few years. I read that a few years ago.
Clay, I read that in the middle of winter, in the dead of winter, in the coldest depths, and the whole time I'm thinking as like, just outside doing like one little thing, thinking about those guys and just how tough and crazy they were to even be out there, but.
People were so much more hardy back then.
Ridiculous. I'm freaking soft. These dudes, the stuff they went through and struggled, and just the constant cold, it was insane.
Yeah.
I do that myself. I do a lot of intentional seasonal reading. I don't typically go the exact genre that you go, Clay. I usually go more. I tend to stick more with like my winter reading. It's kind of, you know, Inuit studies. So like Inuit people's books. I do a lot of that. And then I have my big classic library of the Dick Prenneke journals.
Oh, I love him. Such a great dude.
So,
Do you?
so I get more of I go more down like the inspiration route, because having said that, we have a lot more mild winter here than up there. So you're probably more depressed than me when it comes to the lull of winter. And
I'm not depressed at all. I love winter.
I love winter.
Okay.
Yeah. I really love, like, I just posted today to my Instagram story that that Will Ferrell singing "I Don't Care." I love it, and it says when people say they don't like winter, my response.
I love it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
I do love winter as well, man. I wish that we would get more snow regularly, but I do love it.
But you both got to read about what I'm going to try to read this coming year is Ada Blackjack, who was a Native woman who got stranded on, I believe, Wrangel Island, maybe. She was there for
with the mammoths.
Yeah, same island. I believe Ada Blackjack was there. Everybody else died around her, and she was the only one who left, and she stayed there for a year by herself.
Was she the bush pilot?
No.
Who was the famous Inuit bush pilot that like got stranded somewhere?
I don't know.
Oh man, I don't know.
But
I'll have
Ada,
to think of
Ada
that.
Black. this is like back in the, I want to say like late 1800s, early 1900s. Ada Blackjack gets stuck on this island, stays there for a year. Total badass. Feeds herself the whole time. Like she finally gets rescued, and she's she's totally fine.
Yeah, they have. I mean, in my opinion, they have some of the most incredible strategies for procuring food.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you said, total badasses. I mean, they truly are. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. The one book that I read last year that I can't remember the name of it, but it's an exploration in the Arctic. They end up going to like basically being stranded on, I think they did go to Wrangel Island as well. And the one thing that stuck out to me was this image that the writer had portrayed of or people's journals had portrayed of these Inuit children playing outside, and like it was like just life to them. But in the meantime, all these other people are like on a survival trip. They're trying to get out of this disaster that they've gotten themselves into. Meanwhile, there's these toddlers that is their life, and they're literally playing.
Yeah, and that is those are some of the things that I find the most interesting. Like Gene Briggs, Never in Anger. It's like a book like that where it goes over a lot of like the actual family structure and how children interact with the parents, and then how the parents treat their children. And yeah, I mean, a lot of you'll read anthropologists talking about all the hardships, and then they'll discuss that they left the igloo for 5 minutes to watch the kids that have been outside for 3 hours sledding. And so it really is incredible. And we were talking about a minute ago how today the human beings were at least from the Western world, we're so soft, and with my 2-year-old, we were outside this week when it was really cold in the 20s, so not freezing or anything, or not below freezing, I should say, but I was like, keep your hat on, like it's just instinctual to be like like that. And of course they were covered up a lot of times in incredibly hardy seal, tightly woven clothing to where they were effectively waterproof. But still, I mean, yeah, we've come a long way.
I was actually listening to a hardcore history podcast today, and it was about Dan Carlin, and it was about the it's his latest episode. It's the twilight of the Aesir, or the end of the Viking Age, and where Christianity took over. But he had this whole little mini section about like how everybody says that the Polynesian islanders were like way better at navigating, but the one thing that always gets left out is that the Vikings were navigating seas that were far less predictable, and also with like subarctic conditions most of the time. So they're sailing around in the open ocean, just like the Polynesian Islanders, but they're I guess there's these things called rogue waves that will just like come out of nowhere, and they just proved that they're real like not that long ago. Like scientists actually like proved that they're not just like a fantasy that sailors made up, you know. And so these rogue waves, like they would have these people going to Iceland. There was like 35 ships that went to Iceland, and only like 9 of them made it in one season because of these rogue waves.
Wow.
And, yeah, and just think about that, like how hardy people were. They're you know, we today were like, I want to go on like a vacation, or you know, you want to move somewhere, you just like get your U-Haul and drive it, you know. And they're like, I want to move, so let's go on this open ship for 2 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
and hope we make it.
Yeah, when you mentioned the Polynesians, you know, I thought about like Wade Davis's book, The Wayfinders, and
Great book.
man, it's incredible to think about those strategies that they employed to navigate like that. I mean, effectively monks, you know, and the way that they had to operate, it's pretty incredible. And yeah, like you said, you get the U-Haul, you put in the GPS, you know, you have your Starbucks, and you're there. So
Yeah.
Soft.
Yeah. So speaking of soft, no, not speaking of soft. So George, you have a book coming out next year. You wrote a book, and I wanted to give you like some space to talk about your foraging book that you've written and that is coming out next year. Tell us about it.
yeah, thanks, Clay. Yeah, so I worked with the University Press of Kentucky and come up with a book, and it's called Foraging Kentucky: An Introduction to Edible Plants, Fungi, and Tree Crops of the Southeast. And it'll be coming out April 2nd of 2024. And as far as the actual book goes, I wanted to be able to give Kentucky an actual book dedicated to the wild edibles here. Not in an attempt to try to cover all of the species, because that would just be really exhaustive and not really even necessary, thanks to Sam Thayer's new field guide that just came out. But I wanted to do something a little bit different than what I have on my shelves, and you know, just also again something to be able to provide to the local community here. And so it covers, you know, it's broken up into 3 different parts. You have the herbaceous plants, you have fungi, and then you have the woody plants. And so that also would be able to give, you know, a beginning to novice forager a general foraging, you know, aspect, as opposed to just becoming a plant person or just becoming a mushroom person, which is a dividing force heavily in the foraging community today. And it's fine that is how it is, but I know that whenever I got into foraging around 2010, that I tended to kind of only have one resource for one thing at a time. And I, you know, kind of always wanted to be able to provide something over the last 5 or 6 years that allowed the beginner to be able to kind of have all that under one cover to be able to take out in the field. Because if you're out looking for chanterelles or maitake mushroom, and then also come across any one particular, you know, nut or fruit or herbaceous plant, to be able to also ID that at the same time at the field. So that was the purpose. And so far, as you know, with it not being out yet, the peer readers and what have you, it's gotten a good response, and I hope that it can help people and bring them closer to Kentucky. And for people in the Southeast, it's also incredibly relevant and as important. And every species covered will also, you know, be accessible in most of the Southeast, if not all of it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
So George, before we go then, can you tell people where to find you, find your classes, and then find your book when it comes out?
Yeah, so on Facebook, And on Instagram, the handle is just The Hungry Forager. And then my website's thehungryforager.com. And as far as workshops go, those start up typically in April. My season starts in April and ends usually at the end of October, if not November. And all of those are accessible to be booked through my website. And the book will be available again in April of 2024. At my website, you can get them directly from me. And you can also get them from my publisher's website, which is universitypresskentucky.com.
Awesome.
George, I just want to say, man, it's an honor to have you on the podcast. And I think that you are so much more knowledgeable than most people know. And I think that there's like this thing happening in the foraging world where there's like a lot of like fakies out there, you know, like there's like a lot of guys who are harvesting Diet Pepsis at the store and then posting about trees on their social media. And you are the real deal. I really truly believe that you are the real deal, and I really appreciate you for that. And I just want to say, like, I love your stuff, man, and I really hope that you get a lot of success from it.
Well, I really appreciate that. That is very sweet, Clay, and I feel the same towards you. So thank you so much for that.
All right, man. Well,
thanks for coming.
Pleasure talking to you. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks so much, guys.
And once again, thank you so much for listening to the Publicly Challenged podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening to. Also, if you could leave a review, that would help us out. And you can check us out on Instagram or at publiclychallenged.com. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show.